Now on Open Book, a personal friend, someone I greatly admire, Jay Abraham. He is the author alongside of Roland Frazier. Title of the book, Business Wealth Without Risk: How to Create a Lifetime of Income and Wealth Every 3 to 5 Years. The forward is by our mutual friend, Tony Robbins, another brilliant guy, self-starter, life coach extraordinaire, helping all of us. Jay, I know you got a great business with him. Let's go to you, okay, Mr. Business Growth Expert. 5 decades of doing this. It's great to have you on. You're a marketing legend.
Thank you.
Let's start with a little on your background first and how you met Mr. Frazier, Roland Frazier.
Yeah. Well, how far back you want to go?
You tell me, sir. Take us through who Jay Abraham is.
I think the background is interesting because it's not tangential. It has wonderful lessons. So, and you know this because we've had private conversations. So I got started the first time in the adult world at age 18, got married, then don't recommend it that early, had 2 kids at 20, the need of somebody about 40, nobody cared. The only people that would give me opportunity were crazy but interesting entrepreneurs who would be pretty much eat what you kill. They'd give me a piece of the revenue or the deals or the client or the leads or whatever I could negotiate. And because I wasn't time denominated, it was only result based, I jumped around concurrently and did sometimes 5 things at the same time, and fortuitously never in the same industry. I was the accidental tourist. And what happened, Anthony, after about 10 different industries, I realized that people in one industry don't think the same way, don't act the same way, don't strategize the same way, don't source business the same way, don't lead generate, convert, don't do anything the same way, not because one is better or worse. They're very linear, they're very insular. And I was able to take very basic methodology from past industries I'd been in, combine them into hybrids, apply them in new ways to industries where everyone was doing something the same way, same approach, and everything blew up. I did first I did Icy Hot back when it was a mail order company, and we exploded it using a couple of techniques I learned. Then we did Entrepreneur Magazine and exploded. Then I did newsletters, and I got very serious when I recognized the power in what I call funnel vision versus tunnel vision. And then I became obsessed with trying to learn everything I could about everything I could. And then subsequently, I hopelessly, curiously got involved in about 1,000 unrelated industries on a worldwide basis. And that brings me to Roland. So Roland is an interesting guy. I've spent my whole life working on growing businesses, but not working as much on top line moonshots that I thought were very dangerous, but working on 10x bottom line moonshots that really required almost no extra investment or risk. Roland has spent his career really thinking much smarter than I. I've got, and this is just clinical, probably 50, 70, $100 billion of profit increases to my name. And I've made very, very respectable income, but I was pretty inastute. I never really took equities, and I've made people very, very wealthy. I'm not a pauper, but very well wealthy others. Roland, on the other hand, has realized that the real wealth is in getting control of underperforming businesses. He's got some very ingenious ways to fund them and finance them. A couple of the ways are owner carry, but most of them aren't. And then he's got masterful ways to literally exit for what he calls a mammoth payday and an epic exit. I have the middle, the piece that knows how to get, once you get control, to blow up EBITDA for very little or no extra investment or risk. And when I saw that he had a better approach than I, because he's got interest in about 100, it's like a mini little private equity firm of his own. He's got interest in about 150 different enterprises doing an aggregate of about $6 billion in revenue. But in full disclosure, one of them is a real estate roll-up. So you got to back that out because it's probably 3/4. It's still significant. And he's getting massive cash flow, and he's had 3 exits, and the net worth is amazing. And I thought, well, gosh, I'm older, as you know, but I thought maybe I should change my approach. And that was the genesis 2 years ago. And then we started doing this, and it sort of went out of hand. It was going to be a 200-page book. But then I said, well, you got all these ways, and not my sophistication of how to find them, how to acquire them, how to fund them. you got all these ways to exit, but I got all these ways to blow them up. So let's really develop it. And that's sort of the quick backstory.
I love it. I love it. It's interesting. My assistant, I read the book. Not my assistant, my producer, and Holly basically said, "Okay, I've got to calculate the number of days you have left on Earth." Okay, and she's only giving me 6,205 days, which is 17 years, Jay.
Yeah, but your runway is that much longer than mine.
Which would put me at the ripe old age of 75. I mean, I'm ready to choke her.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm ready to literally. I'm hoping that I can, stay on the planet a little longer than 75. But that's fine. Whatever.
I'm 75.
Right. That's what I'm saying. You look pretty good. I hope I can figure this out.
Thank you.
But let's talk about it. Take my viewers and listeners through being an acquirepreneur, and take them to say, okay, here are a couple of steps you need to take to make some money.
Yeah. Can I, and I'm going to ask,
and create some wealth.
But I'm going to ask permission to make a profound reality check, which I think might be a really good foundation that people will think very reflectively on. May I please?
Please.
Okay. So here's, and you're going to have to straddle this because you're in both worlds. But if you think about it, a lot of people today want to start businesses, and that's admirable because there's a great entrepreneurial movement, and you might need it if your job is outplaced by AI. But statistically, the probability is 1 in 20 startups make it in year 1, 1 in 10 in year 5. So you've got a 5 to a 10% success rate, meaning if you go in debt, you borrow, you put your hopes and dreams, you lose your ass more often than not. So contrastingly, if you find a business that's underperforming but has made it through that, you get control of it, you blow it up, qualitatively, so it's not a manipulative thing, and then you exit in the end of 3 to 5 years, you could create the income or the wealth of a lifetime in that period. Your lifetime, your wealth, not necessarily your wealth, my wealth, but with somebody's relative or more. And then you do it over and over again. You rinse and repeat. But the better part for me, because I'm not really as much into startups as Roland, if you own a business, any kind of business, this is what I love, Anthony. You can grow it conventionally. You can have great marketing. You can have great strategy. You can have great this or that. But if you add acquisition to it and you do it astutely, you can acquire competitive businesses, of course. You can buy product service companies. People buy the product of before, during, after, even instead of what they buy from you. And you might go, well, why instead? Well, a lot of people get leads they don't convert. A lot of people sell something that is short-lived. If you, for example, Anthony, were selling, not that you would, a supplement for weight loss, the average person might take it for 4 months, and most of them don't. They're not very vigilant about their protocol and regimen. They don't lose weight, so they either stop that, buy another one, or go to portion control food, or buy equipment, or get a trainer, or buy recipes, and you've already got the sunk cost in finding that person. So you can be masterful in a lot of ways you don't think about, and then probably more inventive. And I wish I could give credit to myself. This is Roland's. You can buy access vehicles. What's an access vehicle? It's a podcast like this, if I wanted your audience. It is a blog. It is a discussion group. It is a sales force. You're going to laugh about this. I got a client that is trying to do a roll-up in logistics. A lot of little mom and pop, $5-10 million logistics. And some of the owners have an inflated idea of what it's worth. But what has happened is oftentimes the owner of a small business like that starts out, he or she is the salesperson. They're doing all the work, and then they get some momentum, and then they hire salespeople. Then if they do pretty well, they become the golfer, or they become the whatever. They don't even know their clients. You can just hire the sales force for a fraction of what you'd pay for the company, and you get 80% of it. So it's very enlightened thinking, if that makes sense. Now to your question again.
Well, listen, I mean, it's very, very thoughtful. You also know a lot. I mean, you're almost like the Pope of relationships. Okay. And so tell us about, and you write about it in the book, so obviously share your thoughts in the book, why relationships are so important. And in many ways, relationships are really the story about creating wealth without risk. Because if you're with the right people, you're taking on less risk. Well, tell us about that.
Well, and I'll go to my own background. So uh, I learned from masters that if you go in the outside market and you get a prospective buyer client, it's a cold, untrusting person that you have to work your heart out, and it's very arduous to convert them to first level trust, which isn't necessarily committed trust. Even when you get first stage committed trust, it's sort of like that. Whereas if you find people that already have hard won the trust, the credibility, the direct access, you can go to them and you can end up getting an immediate sale, an immediate buy-in. You can get a much larger transaction. Give you a couple of suggestions. In the beginning of the halcyon days of financial newsletters, and I'm dating myself, gold first became legalized, Jesus, I don't know, in the 70s or 80s. And all the gold dealers out there were selling in the Wall Street Journal. They were selling on Forbes. They were just running ads, and it was arduous and it was very expensive. I realized that the real market were the hardcore conservative people that were subscribing to all the newsletters. I went to all the newsletters and I made my gold client the recommended provider. We ended up, every time there'd be a new subscriber, we had our materials in the new subscriber kit. 4 times a year, we paid to do a special edition of the newsletter on the outlook for hard assets. We would fund in their name events regionally that their editor and our president would go to. Bottom line is we went from 300,000 to $500 million in 2 years. Now, admittedly, it's a small margin, but it's still profound. I was in the seminar business when I was younger. Everyone else was running ads. I basically did $250 million, $250 million, and I ran about $300,000 of ads. I got Anthony Robbins to do it. I got the newsletters to do it. I got the seminar companies to do it. I got Entrepreneur to do it. They put the full force of their access, their media, and then I put the fixed cost on the back end and only paid them in direct proportion to revenue that was in my bank. I mean, there's a great saying, and I think you'd like this. It's called the Rothschild story. Supposedly somebody years ago wanted to borrow $100,000 from Baron Rothschild. He said, I won't lend you a penny, but I'll do something many times better. I'll walk hand in hand back and forth twice across the bourse, the stock exchange, wherever it is in France or UK. And when we're done with the second walk, everybody there will loan you all the money you want. That's the personification of the power of it. And, you can do enormous things. I used to have, when I was in the seminar business, I used to have operations in Singapore, Australia, Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Italy, the UK, and I never put a penny out. I would just find other people that already had access to the entrepreneur audience, and I made them partners, and they got a share, and they did all the heavy lifting.
Well, listen, I love you for so many reasons, but the one that inspires me the most are the obstacles. So how do you get through them? How do you fight through things like that? You are somebody, I have a lot of resilience. I've been fired from the White House. I've had ups and downs in my political and business career. But there are certain principles that you've distilled from the masters, let's call them the masters, on resilience and dealing with obstacles. So what are they, Jay?
Well, the first one, and I can tell a great story that I think it embodies it. The first one is that your problem is always going to be the solution to somebody else's bigger problem or opportunity. You just have to figure out who it is and what it is and how to make sure it's articulated. And I'll give you a simple story because I love storytelling, and you and I both know that metaphorically the brain works better. So when I used to do seminars all over, and you can stop me anyway because I go on a tangent, and you can just intervene and go stop. When I used to do seminars in Asia, the first time I ever went to one of the countries, I do this 3-day, very expensive seminar. At the end, I always did through translation Q&A. So this guy comes to the mic, and through translation, he goes, "What do you do if you're too small and the bank won't lend you money to grow?" And I said, "Well, okay, tell me more." And he goes, "I'm a small local motorcycle manufacturer in China. I don't deal with China anymore, but we did then. And only in China, where you got 100 million population, would you literally have a small local motorcycle manufacturer?" He said, "If I had the money, I'd go all over Asia. I'd find a city, open a big factory, hire salespeople in every country, recruit dealers. And I said, okay, what's the problem? And he got very frustrated through translation and went, I told you they won't loan me money. I said, you don't need money. You just need to figure out what you're the solution to. Go all over Asia, find somebody who's got a complementary business that's not competitive, but has already got a huge factory that's underutilized, has salespeople, has dealers, and partner with them. And it took me 2 minutes. The next time I came back a year later, he comes to the mic. I'm trying to underscore my point. I hope I'm not being tangential.
Not at
And
all.
he said, I did what you said. And I said, what'd you do? He goes, I went there. I went all over Asia. When I got to Malaysia, KL, I found the largest lawnmower manufacturer. They had a huge factory, underutilized second shift. We made a deal. I had to bring tools and dies. It's just the metal that forms the parts that make the assembly that produces the product. And he said they had representation in 10 countries. They had offices, they had salespeople, they had thousands of dealers. He said in our first year together, we both netted $20 million apiece. So the first thing is slow down. Somebody else probably has a bigger problem or latent opportunity you could solve. The second is because I have been involved in over 1,000 industries, not businesses, I've seen optionality that blows your mind. Most people, I created something called funnel vision as opposed to tunnel vision. It's predicated on the fact that you have an infinite number of ways to do anything, but you probably don't have the exposure to some of the higher, faster, safer ways to do it. Most people get frustrated. They get disenchanted. They get turned off. They get stymied or constrained because they only have a certain number of options in their reference base. So I'd say to everybody, you got to expand your knowledge base of what's possible because there's a lot more ways to get at it and there's a lot more steps. And that's the second thing. I would say, I remember a book that Fran Tarkenton wrote years ago, right when he had done a public company that blew up, and it was called Failure is Not Permanent. It really isn't permanent. I remember reading another book. It said, that when you're down, you're only down for the count if that's the way you want to be. You have free will, and there's plenty of ways. Another thing, this is very important because a lot of young people don't know this. I've had all these mentors. I have knowledge because I had the good fortune of being in a lot of industries, but more importantly, I've helped over 300 of the top world experts, and none of them came to me for help with their methodology, but I had to learn a distillation. So I got all these wonderful integrated knowledge. But somebody who was a mentor of mine once said when I was young, because I was very, very, very aggressive and I could have gone to the dark side. And he said, you can lose your money, and if you keep your integrity, someone will always back you. But if you keep your money and sell out your integrity, you'll never get it back. And that was a profound statement. I've always tried to always really contribute, and I've been driven by trying to support people who were on a mission or a crusade to bring true value creation to others and what it really meant, whether it means filling a void, whether it means bringing a level of product service or frictionless transaction to people. So I don't know if I'm giving you tangential answers or relevant ones.
No, listen, it's very helpful, and I think the point about integrity can't be overstated. You can have a lot of mistakes in your career, but if you live your life with high integrity, you're always going to have opportunity. You've been called the 21.7 billion man. Let's go there. What is that about? Tell us about exit strategies.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it is actually, it was years ago. We tried to calculate and we just rounded down because rounding down is neater than rounding up. It's probably 50 or 100 billion now, but we tried to conservatively estimate the people we knew we had impacted, and we tried to very conservatively compound it and then discount it for the ones that probably didn't sustain it, were out of business. I've had a blessed career. I've been all over the world, figuratively, not to every country. I've been involved in about every conceivable kind of industry, and I've had impact and very. It's a great pride. I've probably impacted. Lots and lots of experts, lots and lots of consultants, lots of entrepreneurs. We it's funny because I was in New York a couple of months ago. You know that. And I was helping a client of mine. You're going to laugh. It's the largest duck provisioner in the country. They do $250 million of ducks to all the Asian restaurants, 80% of Asian and about 70% of the Michelin. And he grew from 30 to 250 million using 5 concepts. We have lots of stories like that, and we wanted something that would shock people's attention. Back at Exits, just to stay with the book, because you're being very, very respectful and honoring my side of it. The book is all about the fact that if you go at the conventional, by the way, if you do it right through acquisition, you can take a business that has got a low multiple. You can blow it up both in earnings and volume and take it to a much higher multiple level. And I've got a client of mine. They got dental practices. He's done what a DSO does, or is it DSO? He basically buys individual ones for a low multiple. He puts it in with his group of 40, and all of a sudden he's just raised the multiple X times. We did something really hilarious one time. I was doing something with Tony, Anthony. You'll get a laugh out of this. And we do Q&A together. And this is to his high-end people. And somebody came to the mic and said, Tony, I sold my business for a much higher multiple than the business was worth. And I've got a look-back deal where I get the same multiple on all the volume above the base level I can produce for the next 2 years. How can I grow it? And Tony and I both said the same thing. Don't try to grow it. Acquire ones for 3x if you can get paid 8x. But a lot of people try to make the solution harder. I have a metaphor that I love, and I'm throwing things out. You can stop anytime. But I was profoundly impacted by the first Indiana Jones movie. And I was more profoundly impacted by one scene when Indy was being chased down the bazaar by the bad guys somewhere in North Africa, and he was trying to escape and slipped into the alley, and you thought he was safe, and then all of a sudden it was a dead end, and there was the 7-foot giant spinning the sitars and looking like Indy was a goner, although it was only 20 minutes in the movie, so it probably wasn't going to happen. And after about 10 minutes of pensive anticipation, he took out a gun and went, "Phew, stop that shit." And I think it's really important that you have options. You can change the game anytime you want.
I love that movie. I've actually loved all 5 of the movies, even the one where he's playing the 80-year-old Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Which is another statement about life. You're as old as you feel. The book calculated me out to 6,205 days left. So I don't know. I don't like that about the book. That's probably the only thing I didn't like about the book. Everything else I did. I want to talk to you about growth.
Please.
Okay. How do you grow a business? How do you grow yourself? How do you expand and stay neurally plastic at any age?
It's interesting. I'm going to answer you 3 ways if I can. I'm going to go back in time, and I'll be current, and then I'll go future. So I was vividly impacted many years ago reading a book called A Technique for Creating Ideas. It was written by a guy named James Webb Young, who was he ran, I think, J. Walter Thompson's whole creative side when he was back in the 50s, a long time ago. And he wrote a book because all these magazines, when magazines were the most viable form of advertising, would go to him to come up with a great idea to sell out this month's edition, and he'd give it to them. But when they didn't have an idea, it would peter out. And they asked him, how do you create great ideas? And he thought about it, and he wrote this little book. And what he said, the first thing is, and I'll come to the answer to the question, I'll come at it with a progression. He said, the first thing is, your mind was created. Its job is to solve problems and create opportunities, but it's got to know what it's supposed to do. So the first thing is tell it. Then he said, the next thing is take in all the information you can about everything you can on that subject, everything you can on that subject. And he said, but the real key then is taking all the information you can about everything you can off that subject, because breakthroughs are going to come from outside your industry, not inside. And I used to talk about this. I haven't for a long time, so let me dust it off. So if you think about it, fiber optics that transformed telecommunication didn't come from telecommunication. It came from aerospace, and it was borrowed, extrapolated. Either the ballpoint pen or roll-on deodorant borrowed the mechanism from one another. Viagra came from a heart, Rogaine from from Pimple. FedEx borrowed the Spoke and Hub check clearing system from the Federal Reserve Bank and how they cleared checks overnight. The most successful baby buggy does 300 or 400 is the collapsible wheels. So I think you got to be able to travel outside your comfort zone in terms of knowledge and understanding. There was a book, you probably read it. I don't read as much as you, and you're voracious, but it was written by a guy named Epstein. It was called Range. Did you read that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, actually just had that book in my office. I just gave it to somebody. It's a great book.
It's a great book, but I think the premise paraphrase is the people that are going to own dominance in the second half of this century are the ones that have the most range, because hindsight, even insight, isn't the same as dynamism's coming on that takes a whole different kind of thinking. Also, in answering your question, I think there's 9 forms of thinking. I don't remember them all: critical, deductive, inductive, strategic, all these things. Most people only have one of them. Another thing you can look at is pattern recognition. I mean, I'm in awe of Tony Robbins. There's 9 or 10 forms of pattern recognition, and he's almost all of them. I had somebody assess me, and I was about 8 of them. But the more you can see patterns and extrapolate, the more power you have. And I don't know if I'm going to the right answer to your question, but on growth, I mean, if you do the same thing the same way everybody else does it, number one, you're only going to get an incremental growth. You got to do what they don't do in ways they don't do it, and understand. I've always said there's 2 kinds of entrepreneurs, and I deal with entrepreneurs. You deal with more corporate. There's a 2D and a 3D. A 2D entrepreneur thinks in terms of revenue minus expense equals profit. A 3D looks at the value of the asset residually. What's the return they're going to keep getting continually on investment? They look at everything as an investment: a lead, a salesperson, distribution channel, everything. And they have a greater advantage because they're playing a longer game. So that's another way of doing this. A lot of times people don't understand, they understand allowable cost, but they don't understand how powerful it can be. When we did Icy Hot, and I'll go back way in time, but it was hilarious. It was a mail order product originally, and we bought it out of bankruptcy. It was only doing $20,000. We were going to basically just use the equipment from the business, but we did an analysis and found that the average, anytime we got 10 buyers, brand new, it was only $3 a bottle, a jar. 8 of them bought almost every month forever until they died or somebody came up with a cure for arthritis, bursitis, rheumatism. Of the 8, almost half bought a second product every month. Of the 4, and this is average, 2 of them would buy bulk every 2 or 3 months. And the bottom line was, every time we got 10 buyers, even though 2 never repeated, and they paid $3, we were making $50 net profit a year on that person. And we had no marketing budget. My job was to go to radio stations, television stations, media, and get them to run ads when they had unsold advertising, and gave them all the money, and we paid them more than all the money. And people thought we were crazy, but we built 500,000 repeat buyers in a year doing that. So it's understanding the lifetime value, allowable cost, looking at yourself as an investor, learning what your competitor doesn't know. It's also understanding preemptive advantage. One of the things in the book that I love is there could be a business that seems like a dog, and it is by itself. But if you get control of it, it could have multiple advantages. One, it can access a market ahead of everybody else in your generic region, something people buy before, so you have a preemptive advantage. 2, it can be something you can use as a less foreboding way to start a relationship, an easier way to get people to start. 3, it can be something you add to your typical sale, which might be only a modest amount more revenue, but it might double or triple the profit. 3, it might be something expensive you add after they bought everything else, and it might double or triple the lifetime value, which, if you just look at it in profitability, is one thing, but it could double or triple your allowable acquisition cost, meaning what you can invest, not spend, to bring in a buyer in the first place. So I think the bottom line I'm trying to say is you got to think differently than everybody else.
Well, I mean, I think it's brilliant. We're at the point in the podcast where I'm going to read 5 words, and then the author is given the opportunity to say a few things. You can say one word back or a sentence. It's sort of like a Rorschach test on what's in the book. So let's start with wealth. What does wealth mean to you?
Well, to me, it is a definition of a couple things. Certainly, it can be economic, but I think it's satisfaction, fulfillment, purpose, possibility.
Well, there's a happiness quotient to wealth as well, right? Just a fulfillment, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's something that there's a flaw in a lot of people because they're obsessed just with achieving economic. But I think it's an integration of things. But yeah, I think it's many forms of compensation, tangible and intangible.
Success.
Success is I think the ability to feel that you've accomplished something meaningful at the not just the level you're capable, but that you've stretched yourself and you've left the world better off because you were in it.
Failure.
I think failure is an illusory concept because when you don't succeed, you're learning what not to do next, or you're learning to reevaluate your belief system. I don't think failure, I think it's an illusion. I think it's a very positive if you don't risk too much.
Death.
Well, it's interesting at my age, in my mortality, I think death is something you don't think about when you're young. You first of all get gripped with it when you're older, and then you celebrate the fact that it's inevitable, so you might as well enjoy the process to the fullest while you have the chance.
Okay, so I mean, it's a clarifying mechanism that focuses you to, in some ways, make your life more meaningful, right?
Yeah. You've never been to my office, but it's smack dab right in the center of the Torrance runway. It's not on the runway, but it's not even a street, it's just a road, and the planes go right over us. And it's a great metaphor because my runway is a lot shorter than yours, and then you relish the day. You take
not according to this book that you wrote. Okay, when I do this calculation,
I got to do real calculation.
Great. I mean, it's like unbelievable. I'm yelling at my producer as soon as this is over. Okay, my last word. Okay, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Acquirepreneur.
Yeah, an acquirepreneur is a definition that we have given to somebody who doesn't try to start from scratch, but they grow at an outsized, almost an exponential level through acquisition of businesses, resources, assets, and knowledge. But it's about really recasting how you see yourself and the way you create success. And I don't know if you read it, the subtitle of the book is How to Create the Income or Wealth of a Lifetime every 3 to 5 years. And the hypothesis is, why work a whole lifetime and have X when you can have multiples of X, and every 3 or 5 years you can get what you would normally get in that duration. So I think it's designed to dramatically shift your worldview.
Did I mention failure already? I mentioned failure, right?
You want to talk about it some more?
No, I like the failure. I love you on failure, by the way. The fact that it's like not permanent. You know what I mean? I just love that whole messaging related to failure, because ultimately that's it. I mean, my message, if I could go back in time, or let's say I was in a classroom setting and I said to somebody, well, what was the big idea? For me, the big idea is to keep going.
Yeah.
Remember what Churchill said, when going through hell, keep going.
Yeah.
That's what you got to do. Just keep moving, right?
Yeah. And what do you say? Never, never, never give up. I mean, I think people, they take it as a personal effrontery. It's you made a one of the things I learned a long time is, if the assumption driving something is wrong, that everything flows from it wrong. But if you rethink it and say, okay, what did I learn from that? What am I not going to do that way? What did where did I err in my assumption? I think everything is a growth opportunity, and if you do that, I mean, you celebrate living at a much more. It makes it intoxicating and far more liberating and fun, don't you think?
Totally agree with you. Listen, you're a man of the ages, man of letters, a brilliant guy, lots of fun to talk to. Title of the book is Business Wealth Without Risk: How to Create a Lifetime of Income and Wealth Every 3 to 5 Years. And it's fabulous. And, I look forward to spending much more time with you, Jay. And congratulations again on the book. And thank you for joining us on Open Book.
Thank you for the privilege of sharing. I adore you. I think you're one of the finest people and one of the most mammoth minds I've ever met. Thank you very
Well,
much.
you're a good man.
Let's think about compound interest. We all know what compound interest does with money over time. But what's the compound interest of values-based leadership? This is a man in a company that knew what it believed in 50 years ago. And they've made a series of decisions, of principled decisions, based on that same set of values and criteria over and over for 50 years. And the result is a brand that is regarded by Axios Harris as the most trusted brand in the country, that is renowned in corporate America as perhaps the most righteously pro-social icon of socially responsible business there is, even though the revenues are still relatively small, just about $1 billion a year. That's the lesson here, is that when you stick with your gun, when you have that consistency and the conviction for a long time, there are real dividends.
He manifested this life that he's living. He just decided, I'm taking this on, come hell or high water. I'm going to view the world differently. I'm going to give back a lot of the money. I'm going to focus on conservation because this is my love of nature. I'm going to use the apparel business, the sportswear business, whatever I want to call it, to fund and purposely fund my philosophy about how I think about the world and how I want to preserve the world. Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining me now is New York Times reporter, but also New York Times best-selling author, David Gellis. The title of the book, and what a masterpiece this book is. The title of the book is Dirtbag Billionaire. May somebody somewhere, some way, somehow, David, call me a dirtbag billionaire some way. But unfortunately, I'm only a billionaire in Zimbabwe. But anyway, the title of this book, Dirtbag Billionaire, how Yvon Chouinard, hopefully I got that right, how Yvon Chouinard built Patagonia, made a fortune, and gave it all away. Well, first of all, welcome back to
Thank
Open
you.
Book. Celebrated guest here. Your last book on Jack Welch was phenomenal, and I think sea-changing in terms of U.S. corporate culture and U.S. history. So congratulations on that. But what drew you to the Patagonia story and Yvon Chouinard in particular?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me back, Anthony. Always a pleasure to chat with you. You know, as you know, I've been a business reporter for 20 plus years now. We've talked about plenty of stories over the years, and I've covered the good of business, but I've covered the bad of business. You know, I interviewed Bernie Madoff in prison. I covered Boeing after the 737 MAX crashes. But along the way, I also really endeavored to look for those narratives that showed how business could be a force for good. And I'm not sitting here saying Chouinard is perfect or that Patagonia is without its flaws. But as I think you will find when you get into the book, there's a narrative here that shows how one decision at a time, one episode at a time, a company can sort of wrestle with its own demons and try to forge a more constructive path through the wilds of late capitalism and try to make a positive impact in this world. And that, to me, is just as compelling as the bad news stories.
So, I mean, this is like a Nike, right? I mean, it's like an apparel company, right? I mean, it's and when you think about it, though, I mean, I'm used to tech, you're used to tech, I'm used to Bitcoin, you've either are used to Bitcoin or not used to, but this is literally hardcore making garments.
Yeah.
Said differently, this is a Garmento story. And so
Yeah.
tell us about this wonderful guy, how he got into this business, and what made him so well suited, frankly, for this business.
Yeah, and it's important to note at the outset here, this is not a guy who wanted to be a businessman. This is not some entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur who went out and tried to make a company, let alone a fortune. He sort of stumbled his way into this. He was a rock climber as a young man, and then he became a blacksmith who started making his own rock climbing gear. He was good enough at it that other people wanted his gear. So all of a sudden he had this little climbing gear operation by the late 60s, early 70s. But then he makes this pivotal turn to clothing. And he very quickly realizes that more people are going to buy t-shirts than carabiners. And off to the races it is. Patagonia goes over the last 52 years from being a bootstrapped maker of sort of ill-fitting shorts and t-shirts and rain jackets to what is now a $1 billion+ revenue organization, making all the stuff we know it for, black hole bags and baggy shorts and R1 fleeces and vests and all the rest of it. But it was really an accidental turn. He didn't set out to do it, but that's where he landed.
Yeah, I've never met the guy. You've had access to the whole team. I don't know. He comes across likable. Is he likable to his staff, though? Because he's a little erratic.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the second sentence of the book, I describe him as cantankerous.
Right.
So likable, I don't think is the first word people use. He can be
Well, let
charming.
me tell you why I say
Yeah,
likable. As an
please.
entrepreneur, I look at
Mm,
this SOB and I'm like, okay, I learn from this guy. I like his balls. I like his risk
yeah,
taking.
big
I
time.
like the edges of his personality, which are frankly going to make him successful. But then up against that is a little gnarliness. He's got some sharp elbows, David, right?
Big time, big time. And I
Yeah.
think that there's an inherent contradiction in there, right? An inherent paradox between his sort of professed love and affection for his staff. You know, his own book was called "Let My People Go Surfing." He sort of tried to characterize and present Patagonia as this idealistic vision of a place you could go work in Southern California and hang out, and you don't have to work so hard. Maybe the reality is much more complicated. You know, his employees, and I've spoke to hundreds of them over the years, they get worked real hard. And by the way, he never gave any of them equity. By the way, he wasn't paying the wages that a Nike, let alone a Google, was paying. And so there were trade-offs along the way. But I think you identified a real critical aspect of it. He had a tolerance for risk. He was willing to sacrifice for things he believed in. And when it came time and when it really counted, he tended to make the right moves at the right time. And some of that, as you'll know, Anthony, is just that ineffable, unteachable instinct. He had it.
Some of it is also not giving up, though. I have
Hmm.
been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've been in the wrong
Sure.
place at the right time. But just staying in the game, David, right? I think there's a big lesson here from Yvonne on that too, don't you think?
For sure. And I'll try to take it one level deeper and really understand the impact that him sticking with his principles, with his values over time had. And here's one way to think about it. Let's think about compound interest, right? We all know what compound interest does with money over time. But what's the compound interest of values-based leadership? And what I mean by that is, as I trace in the book, this is a man in a company that knew what it believed in 50 years ago. And they've made a series of decisions, of principled decisions, based on that same set of values and criteria over and over for 50 years. And the result is a brand that is regarded by Axios Harris as the most trusted brand in the country, that is renowned in corporate America as perhaps the most righteously pro-social, you know, icon of socially responsible business there is, even though the revenues are still relatively small, just about $1 billion a year. And so that's, I think that's the lesson here, is that when you stick with your guns, when you have that consistency and the conviction for a long time, there are real dividends.
Go to that though. When you talk about doing well by doing good and you talk about a purpose-driven company, a lot of people pay lip service to that. You know
Hmm.
that, I know that, I mean, Google had that thing, do no evil, and all they did was evil. I mean, but this is different. He's actually like drinking his own Kool-Aid. So tell us about the connectivity between the statements about his culture and his actual culture.
Yeah, listen, it is easy to greenwash yourself to some nice headlines and magazine covers these days. I've written those stories, I've read those stories. Uh, the interesting thing here is that while Patagonia has actually not done a lot to promote its own efforts in a lot of these areas, over the years, time and again, they really made a series of decisions that uh, advance the ball when it comes to how apparel brands in particular are thinking about managing their negative externalities, to use a term that economists love. And what I mean by that is, in the 1980s, they understood that conventional cotton was nasty stuff. And it used formaldehyde, and it was making people sick, and it was ruining the fields where it was grown. And so they said, we're not going to use conventional cotton anymore. In the 80s, they made the full switch to organic cotton. More recently, we've been hearing all about PFAS, these forever chemicals that seem to be in everything. Patagonia understood some years ago that they were using PFAS too, and they said, we're going to stop. And if we can't figure out a non-toxic replacement, we're going to stop making waterproof gear. It took them a long time, and there were fits and starts over the years, but they sort of finally figured it out. And now they're making non-toxic waterproof gear. Over and over, they've been confronted with their own shortcomings. And instead of sweeping it under the rug or kicking it down the road or issuing some Friday evening press release and trying to move on, they've tried to do the hard work to get a little incrementally better.
Okay, so why are we calling this billionaire a dirtbag? Go.
Dirtbag, to many people, they hear it, they think, oh, you must not like the guy, or it's a pejorative or a slur. No, Chenard himself calls himself a dirtbag. He self-identifies as a dirtbag because
define what he and you
in the
mean.
rock climbing community from which he came, dirtbag is a term of affection. It's a term of endearment. It means someone who is so hardcore about climbing, so unenamored with material possessions that they are literally content to sleep in the dirt. And so let me just share with you, when Chenard heard the title of this book, Dirtbag Billionaire, he was pissed off. Not because of the word dirtbag, but because of the word billionaire, because he hates billionaires. It's the last thing he ever wanted to be known as.
Let me ask that follow-up question. He hates them because?
Listen, this is my interpretation. He never used this phrase. But Anthony, he believes money corrupts. At a deep and abiding level, he does not trust concentrated wealth in the hands of individuals.
Well,
he
it's
does
imbued
not
in the book.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
you can
no,
see
I
it.
mean, you've laced the book with that messaging, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good segue into authoritarianism. He seems like wants to preserve the natural world. He doesn't like, I mean, you and I both know this, so it's worth saying. We have 5.7 billion people living under some type of authoritarian structure. This man, this dirtbag billionaire, he abhors it. So tell us why he feels so strongly against authoritarian.
Yeah, and here I would note, he is not the most self-reflective individual. He doesn't spend a lot of time analyzing his place in the world. He has visceral reaction to billionaires and a visceral reaction to concentrated power in the hands of a few. He has a visceral reaction to this administration and what it's doing to the natural world and democracy, sure. But he doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about like, oh, there's 5.7 people living under some type of authoritarian rule. That's just not how his brain works, in my experience. That said, he's always been political at a certain level. He's always been unafraid to piss some people off when he needs to. And I'm thinking all the way back to the 70s when he started funding grassroots environmental activists. And that model, his first check that he wrote was for $3,000 52 years ago. Today, the way he structured the company, he's now funneling roughly $100 million a year out the door to conservation and grassroots environmental activism. And so there again, you talk about compound interest, bam, you stick with these principles, you know what you believe in, you really stay with it, you're going to have impact in the long run.
Yeah, you got to give him a lot of credit for that. But the other thing I give him credit for is the unorthodoxy. This guy is literally one of the most unorthodox decision makers. I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, okay, it's going to go this way. Boom, it goes all the way over here. Tell us a little bit about that. Take us through some of those decisions and take us through his philosophy. How do you become that big of a ballsy risk taker?
Yeah. So he was an iconoclast. There's no doubt about that. And just to try to put some meat on the bones here, we're talking to a business community here. And when you think about what the prerogative is for any business on any given day, week, quarter, it's to grow the business, right? And yet there's time and again when he decides to deliberately restrain the growth of the business. He says, I don't want to grow that fast. And so that, I think, is what we mean when we say he's like dodged when everyone else was weaving. He's gone this way when everyone else is going the other way. He has simply said he's not going to play by the same set of rules that everyone else is. And how do you get there? How do you become that kind of a risk taker? I would offer two things. One, I mean, he was, as you know, because you spent some time with the book, he was a crazy, crazy sportsman. I mean, this was a guy who almost died so many times in avalanches, in falls off cliffs, trapped in ice caves. I mean, this man has packed many lives into one lifetime. So some risk taking is just innate in that kind of life of adventure. But the other piece that I don't think we can ignore, let me just add this, is he had the freedom to take these kind of risks because he maintained control of the company, right? He never took outside investors. He didn't have a cap table. He didn't have some venture guys on the board breathing down his neck. He retained control, which let him take the kinds of risks he wanted to take.
Tell me about a big one. Tell me about you did all this homework, had access to all these people. Tell me about a very big exogenous risk that could have been a game ender had it not worked out.
That's great. I'm thinking back, I'm blanking on the exact year here, but I think it's 1992 or so. They have some best-selling products, right? These are a couple products that are making up the lion's share of their revenues and profits. And he gets really dissatisfied with them. The quality isn't good. The materials aren't great. And he works with some new fabric developers to develop alternatives for both of these products. And they come up with good alternatives. And then he goes to his team and he says, all right before the biggest sales conference of the year, by the way, we're replacing all our two main products. And we have this new material that you've never heard of, but I promise you it's going to be better. They freaked out, right? His sales reps were going to have to go to all their retails, all their distributors and say, guys, sorry, the thing that you sell the most of, we don't carry it anymore, but we've got this new thing and we hope you like it. It was those kind of episodes over and over that he was willing to do and that tended to pay off. Listen, in that case, it worked. The new products were better, but it was not a given, right? And had it failed, it could have jeopardized the company.
There's a little bit of Steve Jobs in that, I mean, when Steve Jobs, he literally capped the iPod and he put it in the iPhone. And he said, well, someone was going to do it. It might as well be me. I mean, that's exactly what's going on here with Patagonia. He's moving ahead of his contemporaries and his competitors as it relates to what people want, right? I mean, everything is in here. Henry Ford, if I listen to my customers, they wanted faster horses. They didn't want a horseless carriage. That was the exact
Right.
quote. So we'll go with that. On this topic, it's one unorthodox thing after next. I mean, it is such an improbable story. So what is the cultural glue that Yvonne represents to his company?
Yeah. And this is another super fascinating piece, is trying to understand how he got everyone else to come along on this journey, because he did. And you talk to Patagonia employees today and they've drunk the Kool-Aid. I think there are a few elements that make him have that sort of convening power and that sort of ability to inspire. The first, I think, is that he just had the right priorities, man, right? Like he wasn't in it to buy a sports team or to buy a big boat. He was in it to try to protect the natural world. And we can argue all day about whether he's been effective in that and whether his philanthropy is going to the right kinds of causes. But I think for other people who also have an affinity for the natural world and the planet that we all inhabit, it's easy to rally behind someone who says that they're in business to try to save the earth. Not saying it works, not saying it's not complicated, but I think that is such a unique message in the business world that bam, you got some attention right there. And I think the second part is his history as an outdoorsman. He was one of the world's greatest rock climbers in the 50s and 60s, pioneering routes, lines up major mountains named after him because he was the first one to do it. He became an epic whitewater kayaker going down these crazy rivers. He did these monster expeditions into the Alps and the Himalayas. And today he's regarded as literally one of the best fishermen, one of the best trout fishers, the anglers in the world. And so time and again, he's sort of proven his chops in the outdoors community. And again, for other people in those worlds, man, that inspires a lot of fealty because you're sort of working with the best at that point.
I mean, he earned it. He deserves it. I mean, the reason why I say he's so likable to me, even though he could have been cantankerous to others, is that he manifested this life that he's living. And he just decided, I'm taking this on, come hell or high water. I'm going to view the world differently. I'm going to give back a lot of the money. I'm going to focus on conservation because this is my love of nature. I'm going to use the apparel business, the sportswear business, whatever to call it, to fund and purposely fund my philosophy about how I think about the world and how I want to preserve the world. So, all right. So you spent a lot of time with him. Give me a
Yes.
few words on your impression of his personality. What was he actually like?
Yeah. I want to note here that it's always it's never going to be perfectly accurate. I'm his biographer, so there was some self-awareness, right? Like, what is it? Schrodinger's cat, right? Like when you open the box, is the cat the same cat that it would have been if you didn't open the box? There's philosophy here that helps us explain how it is that a dynamic like this can either show what's real or what he wants me to see. So I have to acknowledge all that. And uh, the man I spent time with, by all accounts, was the same sort of man that everyone else I interviewed for the book, hundreds of people, encountered over the years. He cares about just a few things: being in nature, talking about nature, fishing. He has a pretty rigid worldview in terms of what matters and how it is he believes he can affect change. We've talked a little bit about that. He can be funny. He's not without humor. He can be a little crass at times. There's probably parts of certain conversations that I can't share. He is iconoclastic and combative at times. He's not afraid to say who he disagrees with and why he thinks some people are full of shit. And it's also the case that at the end of the day, I got the sense that he would much rather just be alone. And when you look at how he spent his life, there's some real truth to that. This is a man who had billions of dollars at his disposal, had he so chosen, right? Was the sole owner of a corporation with an equity value of $3 billion. They had an offer at one point on the table for $6 billion. And he just said no. He didn't
Love
want
that
it.
about him.
He just said no. He didn't want the money. And instead, what he wanted to do are the same things that he's always done, which is to be alone in the woods, alone on a river, just at peace, immersed in the natural world. And that's who he is.
Such a great story. All right. So we're down to the last 5 words. You remember this from my last time we were together. I pick with my producer 5 words from the author's book, and then you react to the words. I say the word responsibility in the context of this book. I say responsibility. You say what?
Hard to achieve. The story here is not of a perfect company. It's of one that has tried to get incrementally better over the years. So I think responsibility is a goal, not an end state.
Yeah, it's very well said. What about purpose? A little different from responsibility, but one of those big words, those big cultural words. I say the word purpose, you say the word what?
I think it could be a motivator. I think it can be sort of its values in action. And I also think it's not enough because what the team found out over and over is that they could put out a product that was a purpose-driven product, that was like the newest, most responsible piece of equipment they've ever built. And if the quality sucked, people wouldn't buy it.
Yeah.
So
No question.
purposes can be important, but it's not enough to sell a product.
We touched a little bit on this earlier, but and I don't want to get overly metaphysical, but when I say the word billionaire, you say what?
It's complicated, right?
Well, we see most
Um,
people hear Dick, right? Right? Most people hear
y-
Dick.
yeah,
So
but
what do you hear?
you and I both know enough billionaires to know that they're not all dicks.
No, well, that's
Um,
the irony, the
it's
thing is like
complicated.
everything in life, I mean, I run into people, this is either a backhanded compliment or an unbelievable dig. I run into people, maybe on a subway tube with them, or I'm, traveling and I'm at the baggage claim at an airport. They're like, "Oh, you're way nicer than I thought you would be." I'm like, "Oh, I mean, maybe that's a compliment, maybe it isn't, right?" I don't hear dick, I hear
Right.
complexity. But
It's
the word
complicated.
billionaire, you give it to me.
Well, I think that's where I started. It's complicated. Billionaires have the potential to do a whole lot of good in the world, and we can point to plenty of those. And I would argue that Chenard, although he's no longer technically a billionaire, is one of those people that has tried to put his personal wealth toward causes greater than himself. And you can point to plenty of others who have done similarly generous things with their money. And then you can point to billionaires who are selfish and materialistic and taking advantage of people. And in the same way that folks like Chenard have the ability to have an outsized influence on the causes they care about because they were billionaires at one point, so too do more nefarious billionaires have the opportunity to have an outsized deleterious impact on society at large? And I don't think I need to go down the list of examples that are populating my head right now.
Well said. Patagonia.
Hey, when you say that, obviously the company comes to mind, but I will remind everyone that it is a region in South America. And it's a place where I had the opportunity to visit with Chenard during my reporting of this book. And Patagonia, if you ever have the opportunity to go, go. It is a profound experience to be in the nature that is encompassed in this region, which stretches from Argentina down through Chile to the tip of South America. And I cannot tell you how incredibly moving it is to behold those mountains and those glaciers and the rivers and the fields. It is untouched planet Earth in a way that is getting harder and harder to find.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear Patagonia, I think of that area in Argentina, but I do think of this brand, and I do think of the exceptional quality of the brand, and I will say this to you, David, I wanna get you to react to it. I do believe the names matter. Apple matters. Nike matters, meaning if it was named Junkie as opposed to Nike, probably wouldn't have done as well.
Right.
If it was named Eggplant as opposed to Apple, which is coming from the tree of life in Genesis in the Bible,
Yeah.
probably doesn't do as well. Am I wrong on that?
No, and you're right, and you're touching on another important truth here, which is that Chenard always had a real knack for branding. He just had a gift for it. And in 1973, when he needed a name for the clothing company, he seized on Patagonia. He had just been there a few years earlier with some of his friends on this epic expedition. They got trapped in an ice cave. They almost died. They summited this crazy mountain. That mountain becomes the inspiration for the logo. And Patagonia is one of these words like Shangri-La that conjures up this sense of like a sort of a remote magical place. But it was more than that. Patagonia was also a region that he wanted to make clothes that were strong enough to stand up to the elements in
No,
that
and
harsh
he did,
environment.
he did all of that and more. Okay, last word, and then I give you the last word. Yvon Chouinard.
You know, I first and foremost think of this man in the natural world. Like when I close my eyes and imagine him, he's not behind a desk. He's fishing. He's walking in the woods. He's climbing. And so I think of him as an outdoorsman as much as I think of him as an entrepreneur.
Well, I mean, this is a phenomenal interview, even better book. I loved it, David. So the title of
Thank
the
you.
book is Dirtbag Billionaire: How Yvon Chouinard Built Patagonia, Made a Fortune, and Gave It All Away. but there's so much in this book about culture and resilience and management decision making and sticking to the roots of value and customer and quality and all this other stuff. But the legendary David Gellis, thank you so much for joining us on Open Book.
Always a pleasure, Anthony. Thanks for having me.